Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of ClueCon Weekly. I am your host, Jon Gray, and today we're tackling one of the biggest silent killers of tech teams, documentation. So, in order to talk about this, I have principal consultant at Improving, Keith Wedinger. Keith, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Keith, can you give the audience a little background on yourself and what you are working on over at Improving?
Sure. So, not to date myself, but this is my 37th year in software engineering.
Congrats.
I have
Nice.
worked across a wide range of technologies, platforms, and a wide range of companies, both small and large, just to kind of give you a range of the types of things I've done.
Mm-hmm.
My first professional experience was writing x86 assembler to control a typewriter.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh, wow.
and now so I've seen like how the entire tech industry has grown from like its infancy to what we have today, where we have AI and smartphones and smartwatches and everything else. And so I've had the privilege of working on a wide range of those devices as well as a wide range of those platforms. Currently, so Improving is a consulting company based out of Texas. We have offices across the United States as well as in Central and South America and in India. We do a wide range of project work, nearshoring work, education work, training, that sort of thing. We've had a recent focus on helping our enterprise clients understand and really take advantage of AI in a variety of
Mm-hmm.
ways. Um, my current client is a healthcare startup named Lark Health. They are based in San Francisco, and there's a small team of us that have been brought on board to basically rebuild their mobile app from scratch. And so we're using Expo and React Native to basically build their mobile app from scratch.
Nice. Very neat. Well, after all that kind of background and experience, it's really cool to dive into documentation as kind of what you think is like a source or a key of successful business
Mm-hmm.
models. So, you talked a little bit about the bus factor. Can you kind of explain that to our audience and why it's a useful way of looking at documentation?
Sure. So the traditional definition is bus factor measures how many team members could become unexpectedly available before a project gets critically impacted. So what companies want to strive for is having a high bus factor, meaning that knowledge and responsibilities are well distributed across the team. You don't have that single point of failure. Whereas a low bus factor signals you have a dependency on a few individuals or perhaps even just one,
Yeah.
increasing project risk. So when I told my daughter that I was doing this presentation, she asked me point blank, what does bus factor mean? And she's a nurse. So I explained
Hmm.
it to her this way. Imagine if you have a single person at your hospital that knows how to do this particular procedure, and that's the only person who knows how to do it, and they haven't documented how to do it. So you're completely dependent upon that one individual to always do that procedure. Now imagine, if you will, if that person got hit by a bus. Now what are you going to do? So that's
Oh
kind of
boy.
like the anecdotal, thing I'd like to
Yeah.
say about a bus factor. So actually, on a more serious side, yeah, teams, companies want to strive for a high bus factor,
Uh-huh.
such that there isn't that single point of failure, and such that knowledge is well distributed and responsibilities are well distributed.
Yeah, I was thinking they were all hopping on a bus to go to like Tahiti or something. Not that that's even possible, but no, that's pretty interesting and neat. So obviously, more documentation will give you a healthier bus factor. But what kind of makes docs effective, and how do you kind of do something about that?
So there's a multitude of ways to make your docs effective, and
Uh huh.
so one of the things you need to consider, of course, is the documentation platform that you're going to be using. So you want to choose something that's easy to use, easy to host, that's cost effective, while also at the same time being compliant with any security concerns with your company, because you obviously want to protect information that's documented. You also want to protect access. You want to also make sure that it's very effective and easy for people who are on that platform to generate documentation. So today, naturally, that means, is it integrated with AI in some form or fashion? As I'm typing my documents, is AI kind of integrated there, helping me out
Yeah.
with just rudimentary things like spelling or grammar, but more useful actually is, okay, I've written this rough draft of this thing, and I will readily admit I'm not an author, I'm not a wordsmith, and so where a tooling can be super effective is, I've written this rough draft, give it over to AI and say wordsmith for me, but prompt the AI engine in such a way that they know how to wordsmith it. So you give the AI engine, okay, what's your target audience? What type of document am I writing? What type of information do I need to include? Is it like a step-by-step thing, or is just like a summary more relevant in this particular instance? And so AI can be a tremendously useful productivity enhancer when it comes to writing docs, and it can actually make it, I'm not going to go as far as say is enjoyable, but it certainly makes it easier to do.
No, definitely. There's certainly a lot of friction in order to write it. From a developer perspective, it's just like annoying, to kind of do. You like do the thing and then you're like, okay, now I'm gonna write about it. And that's why there is like so much of that pushback. So I'm glad you mentioned AI tools because that seems to be obviously the way in order to hold on to and not only generate but also kind of maintain code. And the
Right.
maintenance or code, I mean documentation, and the maintenance part of it is something I want to ask you on as well. Is what are some ways that you can keep docs like still alive and not just totally outdated and dead? I find myself all too often going back and being like, I don't even use this tool anymore, or this API spec has changed, or you just read it and you're like, this is just completely garbage, and this was just a couple months ago. So, how do
Right.
you keep not having to handhold all of your documentation?
Um, there is no simple answer for this, but
Yeah.
the general answer is it has to become part of the development process culture. It has to become almost like an expectation within the team that as we're building out this product, let's keep our README or what have you up to date. So, a perfect example of really good READMEs where documentation has been taken very seriously. You go to any GitHub repo for a well-known open source project, and you take a look at a README that's very detailed. It goes into the nitty-gritty of, okay, here are the prerequisites I need. This is how you build this thing. This is how you test this thing. It becomes part and parcel of their software deliverable. And so that's really, for development teams, that's really where you can be most effective, is you make sure that documentation becomes part of the project deliverable. And so in the open source world, for me, if I'm considering the use of something, I will look at the README. How detailed is it? Can I like use this to do everything I need to bring this thing into my project? Whereas if it's sparsely written or it doesn't exist, or even worse, somebody wrote it, but it doesn't work anymore, that's a huge red flag for me anyway, if I'm looking to adopt a particular open source thing into my project. And
Yeah.
so
Oh,
really
definitely.
the key is make it part of the culture, make it part of the software deliverable, but also make it minimal. And so some tips I like to throw out to documentation writers: know your audience, of course. And so if you're writing a README for an open source project, you're not going to go into all the nitty gritty details of like, oh, you need to install Windows, and this is how you install Windows. You would basically say prerequisite Windows done and dusted. You need to have Java installed. You wouldn't go into the nitty gritty details about how to install Java because you can assume some of this stuff.
Exactly.
A couple other things that are very important. If you can write it in 10 words, don't write it in 25. Keep it as simple as possible.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Make
Yeah.
make heavy use of screencasts, pictures, because those will inevitably, they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's very true in documentation. If I can do a screenshot as opposed to write 2 paragraphs describing what's on the screen, that's much easier to do. And so it's very much about keeping it simple, making sure that the doc you write actually does what it says it does, and make it part of your just software deliverable. Make it part of the culture. There is no like, voila, here's the magic bullet. Everybody's going to love write this
Yeah, that's what I was
documentation.
really
Because
hoping for. So
and I
that's tough.
go ahead.
No, I would just wanted to ask a layer deeper. So, you mentioned embedding it kind of into the processes. How do you get team members to kind of buy into it and feel passionate about the documentation that they're making? Because there's definitely a difference between some documentation and others when it's crafted, with a little love and a little TLC on there. So, how do you kind of inspire and rally the troops to make actually like good documentation outside of just saying, yeah, this is what we're going to do here?
So that's a good question. I think if you're doing, well, here's a really good example. Let's say
Mhm.
you've been asked to do something useful or novel that inevitably you're going to have to do it yourself again. So a perfect example I bring up to myself where I missed and I learned the hard way that I should have documented this. On a previous client, I
Yeah.
was asked to create a bunch of Azure objects to set up some graphing inside of Azure. And I won't go into
Uh-huh.
all the weeds about what I actually had to do, but I spent a considerable amount of time researching it and figuring out how to do it. And then I got it done and I got sidetracked and I went off to some place to go do something else. Lo and
Yep.
behold, about a month later, I was asked to do the exact same thing. And so I'm scouring through like my OneNote where I usually keep notes for myself, or like the Confluence site. Did I document this anywhere? Sure enough, I hadn't because I got distracted. And sure enough, now I got to spend all this time doing all that research again. And so it's almost you got to learn the hard way to understand how important it is just to write it down. And
Definitely.
so that for me, that just if nothing else, if I just fire up OneNote and just take notes as I'm doing stuff, that inevitably it'll slow you down a little bit that first time through the process. But when you get asked to go do that same thing again, guess what? You have that checklist right there, and it just made it a whole lot easier. And if you share that with the team, especially for stuff, it's inevitably somebody else on the team is going to ask, "Well, I need to go create X." Somebody else has already done it. And if they've taken the time to write the documentation and say, well, here, this is how you do it.
Hmm.
And so
Exactly.
it gives, I think, the writer a good feeling if you can help the other person solve a problem by writing a good doc. So that's one of the ways you can like motivate people to write this. Um,
Hmm.
there are just types of docs in certain organizations that are just required, can be a pain to write, and there's just no ifs, ands, there's no ways around making it
Yeah.
fun. Um, but at least if you a side effect of like knocking that out of the park, and it's like any other task that you get assigned that you're not exactly very enthused about doing. If you do a great job, it's been my experience anyway, you're going to get rewarded with more interesting stuff to do because they
Yeah.
saw that you knocked it out of the park.
Exactly. No, I like that, just part of, having a little bit of empathy, being like, hey, I've been through this already before, and I
Right.
can at least help you out a little bit. You feel good. And I think that is almost a backbone of our a good open source just culture, or, tech world just in general.
Mm-hmm.
That hopefully we like to think that everyone out there is kind of a good person. And I'm kind of the romanticizing docs kind of vein. I feel as though when you are documenting processes, even specifically, you kind of have a little bit more of stake in the company or the team that you're kind of in.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find
Mm-hmm.
that to be the case between working through teams, and is having a piece of the puzzle kind of like crucial for people and their work?
Yeah. I mean, case in point, if I'm going to cycle to what I call traditionally onboarding documentation.
Yeah.
Um, and I say this during my presentation. If you do nothing else, nail your onboarding documentation. Make it as easy and as straightforward and as self-service as possible for someone joining your team to go from I just have a laptop to I'm productive on day 2, or even better,
Hmm.
being productive on day 1. Now it depends upon what's involved with self-servicing your onboarding. It may just take longer, but if you
Yeah.
can give them a link and say just follow this, and you'll be successful, you create a huge first impression on that employee. That employees are going to be like, hey, they got their stuff together. They know what they're doing. They've taken the time to give me something to get me productive as quickly as possible. Because I don't know about you, but well, here's a onboarding horror story that I've had. I was asked to join another client several years ago, and I was assigned to a tech lead who was basically going to be my guide through my first day. And he took care of like getting me a badge and made sure I had access to everything. And then I get to my desk and he basically says, well, here's the GitHub repo, clone it and figure it out. And then ask people if you have any questions. And this is like a huge e-commerce website with a monstrous code base. That I spent days, probably weeks, getting everything working, constantly interrupting people with questions and whatnot. And you can tell that he's asking another question. They try not to have that reaction, but inevitably you're going to get that reaction. Whereas if you give somebody like this awesome to-do that takes some awesome documentation, that takes them through everything and gets them up to speed quickly, it makes a world of difference. It just really does. So nailing onboarding documentation is hugely important. It can really lead to a great first impression. And the person who writes it, if they see that person becoming successful, that they're onboarded, that's great. But the converse to that, which is actually good, is you got to make sure that docs like that continue to work. And so I was reading something online about documentation. I think this is an extreme example, but I think this has a lot of value. If you're writing how-to docs or a README doc or an onboarding, which is a step-by-step thing, continually test it and make sure it works. And so I read this article where this company, what they've chosen to do, they'll select a team member on their development team from random every month, and they will remove them from everything. They'll basically un-onboard them and ask them to go through onboarding again to make sure that the documentation still works.
Oh man, that is punishment.
But I think it enforces the importance of making sure you get that stuff right. And so when you get into inevitably lots of docs will get created. A couple other tips that I want to make sure I emphasize: don't repeat yourself. So in other words, it's you go into a documentation platform, you see 5 how-tos, and they're all attempting to document the same thing. Which one's right? So don't repeat yourself. Make sure there's a single source of truth. If something is old, get rid of it. Nearly all of your documentation platforms, if you delete something and you need to get it back, you can get it back. Or if, in the case if you're using like READMEs or Markdown files inside of GitHub, if you delete something, you can get it back. But keep the documentation tree as lean and mean as possible. And thirdly, and this is actually probably one of the most important points, make sure any tool you choose has really, really good search capabilities. Nobody likes to go into a search engine, type in something, and they get 100 hits, and then they're like, which one is relevant?
No, definitely. And I like those tips that you gave, and I'm curious if any of them kind of shift depending on if they're AI tools or if you're non-AI having to like scrape through documentation, or if you have any AI specific tips, kind of like what you can or can't feed to LLMs. Are you dishing out too many secrets, or what advice do you have on kind of like the AI side of things, or is documentation as a single source of truth kind of the key to that?
Well, with regards to AI, and I just saw a presentation from a coworker of mine during lunch. Copilot and Google have both introduced this concept of a notebook LLM. And so what you could do is feed that LLM like the documents you have in your platform. It could be online, it could be Word files, what have you. And then the AI will use that as its data source for documentation queries. And I thought that was really cool. And it looked like it was very easy to say. I have not personally played with that yet, but I'm looking forward to doing so. But that would be a great way to like leverage AI tooling on top of your documentation platform so that you can ask AI type prompts of documentation and get answers. So perfect example, the example that I saw, the person loaded a notebook LM with all of our benefits information. And I'm sure you've been through open enrollment and the tidal wave of documents you get with regards to.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And so what was really cool is they loaded all of this into the LLM, and then they asked the notebook LM, okay, give me a chart, a simplified chart of the plans, the costs, and the deductibles. And so it plowed through all of that stuff and just came up with this just really simple chart to look at that broke everything down really nicely. And so I think as we move forward, that's going to be a tremendous asset. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if like companies like Atlassian or whoever runs and owns Confluence, they're going to integrate some of that into their documentation platforms.
Yeah, no, definitely. You actually set the stage perfectly for what we do at SignalWire. AI agents are a huge core component of what we build, and kind of like the voice aspect to it, and the trust and accuracy of it is really important. You know, if you call like a doctor's office and they give you the wrong information, you are going to be in a world of trouble. Same as you know, if you're trying to feed someone documentation and you give them the wrong stuff, you know, they're going to be bashing their head through the wall up until 3 a.m. trying to figure out what is actually going wrong. So, yeah, we have a similar feature, and I'm excited. We'll roll it out to you one of these days. I'll give you a demo because it would be cool to mix our two worlds together. And when they collide, when you have good documentation and it meets some telecom capabilities, it will be pretty sweet.
Okay. So,
but Keith, yeah. No,
one more quick thing I want to make mention about AI, and this is super important, especially make sure, and it's going to sound like corporate speak, but it's very important. Make sure you abide by your company's policies when it comes to AI usage. These AI engines assume they can grab whatever they want and use that to like enhance their learning. Just make sure you're compliant with your company's policies with regards to approved AI tools. You don't want, you don't really want to risk using something they haven't approved. Best case, you might just get a call from your manager say, hey, you really shouldn't be using that. Worst case could be a lot worse, and I don't think I need to like go into those details, but you get the idea.
Yeah. No, it's like cheating on your math test. You know, they aren't too nice to you about that. But
yes.
On that vein, is there anything else I have yet to ask before we wrap things up over here, Keith, or anything you want to shout out?
This is a final note, and it gets to measurements because inevitably the manager will ask, well, how do I justify this?
Yeah.
I have seen countless examples where organizations with effective documentation, it saves time and it saves money. And I'm not talking little, I'm talking a lot. And it avoids situations where, and it could be a guy, like critical person just goes on vacation. And I've had that happen to me. A critical person went on vacation. They're the only person who knows how to do this certain thing, or the only person who is allowed to do that certain thing. They were gone for 2 weeks. It holds the project up for 2 weeks. You've got to avoid that. So
save some headaches, make the world a better tech place, do some documentation. Keith, I appreciate the time. It's been a great episode.
Thank you.